The life and death of Emmett Till. Born in Chicago, Illinois, he was described as a happy and sweet child. At the age of 5, he contracted polio, but eventually recovered, and while it left him with a stutter and caused him to be shy, it didn't hold back his naturally joyful nature. At the age of 14, on a summer trip in 1955, he went to go visit some family and work in Money, Mississippi, a small town with a population of 400. This town just so happened to be less than 30 miles away from the White Citizens Council in Indianola, Mississippi, which is a white supremacist group of nearly 60,000 members. Their main goal was to bring back segregation and declare white superiority. They're now called the Council of Conservative Citizens, but you can see the climate of the area Emmett was visiting. 3 days into his trip, he decided to make a store run with his cousins in search of some bubble gum, as they had been working all day and wanted to treat themselves. While at the store, he spoke to a 21-year-old woman, Carolyn Bryant, after whistling at her, but that whistling made her so upset, she stormed out of the store, in which the kids outside said she was going to retrieve a gun, causing Emmett and his cousins to run home. A few days after the incident, Carolyn's husband and his brother were so outraged by Emmett's whistling, they went to Emmett's uncle's house, likely with Carolyn. On August 28th at 2:30 a.m., Emmett was kidnapped, and they threw him into a shed while they figured out what to do with him. After a bit of pondering, they came up with torture. And if you're wondering what two men over 6 foot, weighing more than 250 pounds each, could do to a child, wonder no more. Because they forced 14-year-old Emmett to carry a 75-pound fan on his back to the edge of the Tallahatchie River, where they then stopped and made Emmett strip down to nothing. Then they began to mercilessly beat him. While they did beat him to the brink of death, they kept him alive to mutilate his body, including gouging out his eyeballs, then wrapped him up with barbed wire to the fan he carried, shot him in the head, and pushed him into the river. Emmett's body was found a few days later, but his face was so disfigured, they were only able to identify him by the ring on his finger he always wore. In 1955, an all-white jury found Carolyn's husband and brother not guilty. The next year in 1956, they both admitted to their crimes, but never served a day in prison, as they committed this crime to display the US systems were designed for whites only. Carolyn later admitted to a historian who closely documents past US events at Duke University that she made up the part about Emmett whistling, and in fact was the one who approached him, causing the death of 14-year-old Emmett for nothing. Carolyn also didn't receive any punishment and is now happily living in her retirement in Raleigh, North Carolina. Top 3 selfies before death. Number 3. Jenny Rivera, at one point, was named the top Latin artist and the top selling Latin artist, along with having 2 Grammys. She was a very important figure in her genre of music. She even had her own TV show, I Love Jenny, but on December 9th, 2012, Jenny, 5 of her friends, and a pilot would depart from Monterrey, Mexico, where she just performed at a sold-out event. They took off in the private jet with their sights set on Mexico City, but not before taking this selfie, which would inevitably be their last photo alive. As soon after taking off, the jet took a nosedive, crashing into the ground at 600 miles per hour, the crash leaving no survivors. Number 2. Ashley and Colette were 2 best friends on their way to Colette's bachelorette party when they took this selfie. Afterwards, Ashley tried to pass a semi-truck whose fumes were giving Colette an asthmatic reaction, but while attempting to pass the semi, on the other side of a hill, an oncoming Dodge Ram appeared. They both swerved, causing the pickup to impact the driver's side, sending them off the road where they crashed. Both of the drivers escaped with minor injuries, but Colette, on the other hand, couldn't talk, but she did nod in response to Ashley's questions moments before passing away, making this photo of the two just 8 minutes before the crash the last minutes alive for their bride-to-be. Colette was wearing a seatbelt, and no files were ever charged against Ashley. And number 1. In March of 2014, 15-year-old Gary Slock and his mother Petra were going on vacation to a special trip for single mothers and their children. Before takeoff, they took this picture and posted it on Facebook. Sadly, just 3 hours later, a Russian intelligence officer shot the plane down, killing all 298 people, including Gary and his mother. Do as Russia does, denied the outcome of the investigation. 5 interesting stuff. Number 5. I'm sure you've heard by now about the ultra-wealthy in Buenos Aires having built a gated community on a natural capybara habitat, which initially made them flee, but now they're back. And while they're normally portrayed as 100% peaceful animals, like nearly all other animals that exist, if they feel threatened, they will attack and defend their territory and their life. Like this dog's seemingly offensive stance, triggering a capybara to become defensive. They also don't really make the best neighbors because of their constant noise making and their desire to hang out wherever they please. And for their worst neighborly behavior, not only do they poop often and in large quantities, but they also partake in coprophagy, which is a fancy way of saying they regularly rummage through their own poop to look for tasty treats in order to redigest them for better absorption of nutrients. Number 4. The angled sunbeam just looks like your average butterfly until you see him in his previous form. This is called the prepupal form. Here, he is ending his journey as a caterpillar and will metamorphose into a butterfly. He's unable to eat and is even unable to move. He's just stuck to a leaf due to his silk. Luckily, he's got tentacles on his hindquarters. Yes, this is his head. And these tentacle organs activate by touch because nobody's gonna want to eat something this creepy looking. And also, they're thought to maybe produce some kind of volatile secretion. but nobody knows for sure. Number 3. And on a more devious note, some birds participate in kleptocracy, which is another fancy word for something simple. It just means they steal the fur of other animals for warm nest building materials, like this black crested titmouse, plucking the fur from a live but sleeping fox. Weirdly, the animals don't even need to be asleep, and for the most part, they don't even seem to mind it. And best believe, you're not safe either, because they will take any kind of hair they can get their little beaks on, making the titmouse a true kleptomaniac. Number 2. Common media portrays turtles as slow as a snail with a medium size, yet turtles can be moderately fast. These things can definitely chase down a toddler. Though on land they're faster in short bursts, they're still the fastest reptiles, with leatherbacks reaching 22 miles per hour in water. They're also huge, even though they're often seen as small. And some are, like my box turtle Charlie, but some are also huge, with the height of a Galapagos turtle reaching up to 5 feet tall, whereas the average woman in the world is 5'3", meaning women are only a few inches taller, and it's probably looking a lot of you guys in the eyes. And number 1, the award for the weirdest mating ritual goes to the leopard slugs, who begin by intertwining and sliding down a rope of their own mucus. And if you don't know, all slugs are hermaphrodites, so at the bottom of their mucus rope, they both reveal their male reproductive organs, which are located in their heads, which also intertwine, and are the reason why they're upside down in the first place. As they're so large in relation to their bodies, they need the help of gravity, but after the fanning of the phalluses, they will both leave happily pregnant, but also exhausted, as this slimy ordeal usually lasts between 2 and 12 hours. Time out. Commercial break. Only 7% of you guys are subscribed. Help me change that. 92.4 of you guys subscribe right now while you're watching the video. That way you never miss one of these. Top 3 facts you wish you didn't know. Number 3. Europeans had been eating Egyptian mummies for hundreds of years. At the beginning, only the ultra wealthy could get their hands on them, so royal families and pastors would consume bones, fat, and even human blood as cures for ailments. The Bible states the soul is in the blood, and they thought that drinking human blood would give them the strength of that soul, as well as eating human skulls to cure headaches. Each part correlated to what it fixed. In the 16th century, during its peak, after Europe ate all the Egyptian mummies they knew of, more and more people just wanted human-sourced medicine. The sellers caught on and began passing off toasted camel skin and freshly dead humans as mummies. Soon enough, they didn't care if it was a mummy or not, as long as it was human, and most people could afford it. So while being disgusted of the cannibalism in Brazil, they were fine with themselves doing it. And the last known attempted European mummy meal was documented in the 20th century. So you know, if we ever enter the Dark Ages again, you could always be dug up and eaten. Number 2. People are almost never killed instantly. While it's usually used to console families about their loved ones passing, death isn't an event, it's a process. Meaning for it to happen instantly, you need to pretty much be obliterated. For example, an Air Indian technician got sucked into an airplane engine and was shredded into tiny pieces, which is obviously not something I can show you. But if you can imagine freshly ground beef thrown on the insides and the backsides of an airplane engine, then you can get the picture. The biggest instant death event was most likely the people nearest to the Hiroshima nuclear bomb explosion. Even things like a fatal gun wound to the head can result in paralysis, disability to halt communication, and going unconscious. And all of that does seem like death from the outside. So unless you go through some gruesome or rare occasion, instant death isn't really on the table. And number 1, you've probably heard of the saying, if it's brown, lay down. If it's black, fight back. If it's white, good night. As polar bears are on the short list of animals that hunt humans down for food, while crocodiles will take a meal swimming off a river's edge, and tigers have been known to revenge kill and occasionally chase a meal, polar bears have no fear of humans. They are obligate carnivores, meaning unlike all other bears, who will eat berries, mushrooms, and any other calorie-dense options, polar bears will only eat meat, and they need that meat to survive. They're their ecosystem's apex predator, hunting anything it wants, while also having no natural predators. And unlike other predators, if you get away, that's just not far enough, because they will be tracking you down from behind, many miles away from where they lost you. And lately, grizzly bears have come about, a polar and grizzly mix, and thanks to climate change, it'll be happening a lot more often. Grizzly bears' habitats stretch farther north every year, while polar bears struggle to find a mate due to melting ice destroying their population. And unfortunately, the grizzly bear's behavior is more akin to the polar bear, as well as being bigger than the grizzly, while having the mix of their parents' fur, giving them the opportunity to come south if they so choose to. So you never know, pretty soon, grizzly bears could take over the Americas, with their ruthless taste for human, one day possibly needing a trained hunter with a high-powered rifle, just to get your kids to school safely. Top 3 worst reasons people have killed. Number 3. August 13th, 2021, a man by the name of Jake Davison opened fire on a UK town of Plymouth. Though he took the lives of 5 people, and in the US that number is seen about every other month, for the UK, this is out of the ordinary, becoming the worst mass shooting in almost 10 years. But what drove him to this extreme? 22-year-old Jake complained just days before the attack about not being able to get a 16-year-old girlfriend. Even further, which did not come as a complete surprise, claimed that he was inspired by the extremist far-right movement in America. After calling women simple-minded, he blamed not being able to get a girl to touch him, which made him a lonely incel, on the reason for his attack. Number 2. Becoming a serial killer to become a hero. Richard Angelo was a nurse in 1989, until he was found injecting an unknown substance into the IV of his patients. After the patient fell ill, more nurses came in to check on him. A urine test was ran, and Pavilon was found. Pavilon is used for two things. One, as a muscle relaxant with general anesthesia during surgery, and two, in the United States, as one of the 3 injections used for human euthanasia during lethal injection of the death penalty. After the urine test on his patient, 30 bodies were dug up who were past patients of Richard and examined. It was concluded that he poisoned up to 35 unsuspected patients, and 10 of those patients died as a result of Richard's secret injections. When asked why he would do this, he claimed he would wait until they went into cardiac arrest, run into the room, and save the patients in front of his colleagues, so he would look like a hero, which is a pretty dumb way of getting 61 to life. And number 1, being unfriended on Facebook. In 2012, Tennessee couple Janelle and her boyfriend Jamie were in a group of friends with another couple, which happened to be named Billy and Billy. But Janelle just liked her boyfriend Jamie and was kind of obsessed with Billy. As the Billies caught on, they unfriended her for acting pretty weird. So Janelle's next move was to claim they were harassing her, all while making fake accounts to spy on the Billies, as well as cyberbullying herself for attention. After getting fed up with all the cyberbullying she was doing to herself, along with being unfriended on Facebook, she got Jamie and her dad to go to the Billies' house and kill them. Though Janelle's dad claimed it was an accident that he shot his gun, he had no real defense on why he slit their throats afterwards. The Billies' baby was found alive, coated up to their dead mother's body, covered in their blood. They all had different stories, but luckily, Jamie snitched on everyone, securing a 25-year sentence. The conspiracy and murder charges were actually merged in this case, getting Janelle's mother, who knew of the event prior, the same sentence as Janelle, and they're eligible for parole in 2071, while Janelle's father got the highest. So if he's still alive at the age of 177, he'll be eligible for parole in 2131. What was Jesus like? Obviously, this is up to what sources you use, and even what time period, and whoever's Bible you decide to use. I mean, the Bible today isn't even the whole Bible. The last book removed from the Bible was less than 200 years ago, even though Apocrypha was in the Bible that Jesus read, and was in almost every single Bible until 1828. What I'm saying is, he's a figure in a religion that's still developing and changing. Nothing had ever been written about him until 30 years after his death. So for looks, the very oldest depiction of Jesus we have is this. This is Jesus on the cross with a donkey head from the 1st century, but nobody believes he has a donkey head, so we're just gonna skip that. Now around 200 years after his death is the oldest depiction we have. This one is the healing of the paralytic, but if you read the Bible, you know this better as a depiction of Matthew 9:6, where Jesus tells a paralyzed man to get up and go home. It was found in Syria and dates back to around 235 AD. And the next one is called the Good Shepherd. The Bible doesn't have many descriptions of Jesus, but often refer to him as a shepherd and his followers as sheep. This is a depiction of that and was found in the catacombs of Rome that dates to sometime in the 200s AD. So what does this tell us? Absolutely nothing. Go ahead and tell me what your 8 generations ago ancestor's favorite author looked like. That's about how well these artists knew what he looked like. We do know he was about 33 years old when he died though, so facial aging of a man in his 30s. And he was also known to be an average looking man for his hometown in the Middle Eastern town of Nazareth. He also blended in amongst the people of Jerusalem, which would make sense since his mom Virgin Mary was also from Nazareth. But the average man in the area would have been 5 foot 5 inches tall, medium brown skin, with semi-curly hair. For his clothes, they wore a tunic and a belt, which today we would just call a dress, likely with tassels or fringe. And on top of that, sometimes a toga, which is a dress-like garment. So pretty much 2 dresses above the knee and sometimes a hemation. We know for sure he wore one of these because in Mark 5:27, a young woman grabbed it and sucked some of Jesus' powers out. Any of these combined with sandals would have been his everyday attire. For his personality, he is overwhelmingly described as gracious, kind, and a forgiving person. He was also so accepting, people criticized him for hanging out with tax collectors and sinners all day. As for his love life, there was never any mention of him wanting a relationship, and likely wasn't gay like people say, or straight like people think. As far as facts go, he was asexual, and had no yearn to be physically attracted to any humans. He was also described as never sinning, and he never married, so we could be assured he was a virgin like his mother. So with all this information put together, we can pretty confidently say, amongst the common belief today, that when Jesus died, he was a 5'5" Middle Eastern man with brown skin, loose curly hair, that wore a dress and sandals, and was a virgin. Also, he was kind and loving, but also serious, but not serious enough to detract from his magnetic personality. So we can see today's scientific model compared to his Eurocentric model, and realize these are very different looking people. Ghost DNA. I know, it sounds weird, and it is weird, just not that weird. You probably know by now Neanderthals lived in modern day Europe, but some populations actually lived in the Middle East as well, which led to human Neanderthal interbreeding. That causes Europeans and East Asians to have the most Neanderthal DNA. Europeans bred more with Neanderthals, but East Asians' Neanderthal link is closer in time to us, which gives them about the same amount of Neanderthal DNA, 2 to 4% respectively, though these genes don't have much of an effect. People once thought Neanderthal DNA could surface in the color of your hair, if you have freckles, and even your eye color. But that turns out not to be true. The only shown link in Europeans is higher rates of depression and higher chance of blood clots, but there's thought to be evidence in possible head shape and immune system, though no links have been proven as of yet. Most people in the world now actually share Neanderthal DNA, but the lowest is in Africa, which makes sense, seeing as there's no Neanderthal remains that have been ever found south of Jerusalem. But there's another group of people with even less Homo sapien DNA that's not replaced by that Neanderthal DNA, and that's Pacific Islanders, with DNA from the Denisovans. Yes, I know, it looks like a Homo sapien, but it's not. That's a Denisovan. And Melanesians specifically have up to 6% Denisovan DNA, which is the only DNA from another type of human that can affect facial features. Weirdly enough, natives from South America also hold this DNA, as well as Neanderthal DNA. But Pacific Islanders in general also have a bit more non-Homo sapien DNA, and nobody knows what it's from, called ghost DNA. In fact, so do West Africans, who have the most ghost DNA of anyone on the planet. No links to another hominid have ever been found, as well as no matching bones that would indicate relation. Yet some have up to 20% of non-Homo sapien DNA, creating a mystery of their origins. But this was before the Out of Africa event, meaning nearly every human on Earth has a small bit of this. So I guess technically, this means we're all the same amount of Homo, but different amounts of sapien. Could be like some other alien thing. But in the most sapien race, we have West Africans coming in last place, then Melanesians, then Pacific Islanders, then Native South Americans, then Europeans and East Asians, then Middle Eastern people and South Asians, then Native North Americans, and then Sub-Saharan Africans. Minus those guys. But even they still aren't full Homo sapien, with a possible 0.3 non-Homo sapien DNA. And even though North Natives and Sub-Africans were last, they are technically the most genetically different than any of the two on this list. Natives of North America have the closest relation of having the same DNA. And looking at the Bushmen of Africa, they're the most genetically diverse within a respective race. So the most genetically different Bushmen and any random full Native American are relative opposites. But genes aren't linear, and the differences are so extremely minute, they may as well not even exist. I mean, look at this. Does this look more opposite? Or does this look more opposite? The real lesson here is, you're not built different. In fact, you're likely a 96% Homo sapien carbon copy. The world's oldest currency. The oldest currency still in use is the British pound, which can be traced back until 775 AD. But as you can see, it's not quite as valuable as it once was. And obviously, there's money even older than that. That's obviously been discontinued by things like mass murder, war, and combining empires. If you look up the oldest coin ever, you'll be met with this Lydian coin, a 2,700-year-old coin from the Middle East, found in modern-day Turkey. It's made from electrum and it is historic, but according to the definition of a coin, there are items older than that also fit the description. Coins likely 50 to 100 years older look a lot more simple, because if it's not obvious, this complex design isn't where it started. This is what the very first coins look like, and it hardly looks like one. But remember, round, metal, stamp, and used as money, which are all true. There are coins existing like this at least 40 years older than the Lydian stater. But not just our version of currency was the only currency that ever existed, because money is older than written history. Micronesia had rice stones, and they used these stones as money. They had used stones as money that traced back to about 2,000 years ago. Ukraine's ancient currency can be traced back to bronze dolphins. They're around 2,500 years old. China's oldest currency were 3,000-year-old cowrie shells. And the oldest Native American money, possibly 4,500 years old, were dentillium, used by the Inuit and Pacific Northwest tribes, but most popularly by Northern California tribes, like the Yurok, Karuk, and Hoopa tribes. It was so popular, it became pretty widespread. But there's still older money, like cattle, that are thought to be the world's oldest currency. 10,000 years ago, you could go anywhere in the world and use one to buy something. But there's one item that predates the exchange of cattle. Because what's more important than food? Actually getting the food. But the bow and arrow technology arising 65,000 years ago in Africa sparked the trade of the arrowheads, making it the oldest currency. The best ones could get you a trade for nearly anything. What does billions of dollars, hemp, the Great Depression, and both popular political parties of the US all have in common? William Randolph Hearst, who proves it doesn't matter how much money you were born into and eventually make, people will forget about you, even when you own the most popular news article outlet. He was an outspoken devout Democrat and was associated with helping the working class from 1904 to 1910. And then, all of a sudden, became an outspoken Republican from 1911 to 1951, 1918 being the year he would become conservative. But he did still support Franklin D. Roosevelt for a while, but eventually became described as a nationalist and an anti-communist. He hated the UK, France, Japan, and actually pretty much everyone, but he was well liked by his new party. That is until he dropped his loyalty for FDR, who was always regarded as a top 3 president in US history, for doing things like creating a minimum wage and pulling an economy out of the worst collapse ever. But as William turned against FDR, his party turned against him. So even though he was hated by mostly everyone, by 1928, he had what would today equate to $30 billion, from becoming pretty much the father of tabloids, papers with huge headlines about crime, sexual mishaps, and corruption, to scare people into reading them. His craft was so perfect, he was the #1 seller of newspapers, and wouldn't you know, is the man credited to creating a long-lasting myth in cannabis. His major investments in paper would be catastrophic if he didn't stop the emerging hemp industry. So William and Harry teamed up to create hemp propaganda in order to get it banned to save his profits. Yet, he still fell victim to the Great Depression, and as more people starved to death, they didn't really care about semantics or drama, and were more receptive to taking handouts from a liberal government to, not die by starvation during the worst economic collapse to ever exist. Also, William was terrible with money and was in a massive amount of debt. He eventually had to sell his exotic animals, expensive art, precious metals, his jewelry, nearly all of his houses and property, most of his expensive collectibles, and pretty much everything, and gave his money to a trustee, who made his salary $500K a year. But when he sold those items, he also sold them at a loss.
It has not been easy for me, and I started off in Brooklyn. My father gave me a small loan of $1 million.
Though he did barely secure 2 loans for $1 million apiece to avoid bankruptcy so they wouldn't take his failing paper business, and by 1938, his net worth was negative by the million. Even Time magazine exposed him for being at risk for defaulting on his mortgage, going from a man with many properties to a man who couldn't even afford to live on his own single property. He was still acting all elitist though, but everyone knew he was losing money by the second, especially the other rich people like the Rockefellers, who was buying all his junk. He was barely hanging on to his newspaper business when World War II happened, and we all know how profitable war is for the rich, especially when they destroy a competing industry in the process, skyrocketing his revenue once again. From 1940 to 1946, he spent most of his time on a Siskiyou County estate that I just passed a few months ago, but he only enjoyed his money for 6 years until he was too weak to work in 1947, and he had to be taken to Beverly Hills and eventually died in 1951. The events of the war, and people wanting to know what was happening around the world, secured the money they needed, and the Hearst family is now worth around $30 billion. So this man was the original clickbait, fear-mongering headline producer, and the man that made weed illegal, helping America tear in 2 parts. He put $30 billion in his pocket, but probably took away $1 trillion worth of profit the US could have made all these years. When all said and done, I'd call this guy a net negative.